Good afternoon. This is the topic 2 for Economics and Accounting course, and today we are going to discuss about supply and demand. You have to memorize the following words. This is going to help you for a better understanding of this topic as well as the topics that come later. So the demand would be the quantity of goods or services that buyers wish to purchase, and this might be expressed through the in terms of the behavior of the single buyer or the behavior of all the buyers in the market. The demand curve will include a line on a graph that shows the quantity of goods demanded at each possible price on the market. And then we're going to refer to the factors that vary and affect the way the world markets operate as variables. Okay. So furthermore, you also have to know the following words. So supply is the quantity of goods or services that sellers are wishing to supply. This can be expressed in terms of the behavior of a single seller or of the behavior of all the sellers on the market. And then the supply curve is going to include a graph that shows the quantity of goods supplied at each possible price on the market. Elasticity would involve how quantities of goods and services demanded and supplied responds to changes in the price in market. And then we're going to also discuss about the marginal cost and marginal revenue, whereby the marginal cost is the change of a total cost as a result of producing an additional unit of output, and the marginal revenue is the change in total revenue as a result of making and selling additional unit. Okay, so please remember this these words, memorize them. We're going to use them we're going to use them a lot in the further lessons. Okay, now the demand curve would involve, as we said, it's a line which is going to demonstrate the quantity of goods demanded at each possible price on the market. So the demand curve would involve would be actually demonstrated as part of a graph. So this would be the graph. We discussed about it a lot in the past 2 weeks, right? So basically the price is going to be always placed on the vertical axis, and the quantity is going to always be placed on the horizontal market, right? So basically we are going to both apply the graphs for the demand and supply, and we are going to read most of the data in economics by using the graphs. Okay. So so basically, one principle of the demand says that if the price of the product that is sold increases, then demand is going to drop. Okay, so further we're going to find out whether this is a rule that is applicable for all the situation in economics, or in certain situations this rule might change. Okay, so as an example, let's say that we have a unit price of £6. Here is it, £6. Okay, and for which the buyer is ready to purchase a product. When the price drops to £2 a unit, five units of this product might be sold. You might not see it here, but it's somewhere behind my picture, right? So for now we are going to look into another example, right? So let's imagine that you are running a bakery. So we call it the Fleur Wheel Bakery, right? And you make most of your money selling bread, but you have noticed a growing demand for cakes as well, right? So what are you going to do? You're interested in this market because it will give you the chance to make more money, okay? And because your customers are prepared to pay more for the cakes rather than bread. So you're particularly interested in investigating the market of the chocolate cake. So you make some of this kind of cake and you collect data about how it sells. So you notice straight away that to sell this cake, the best day would be the Saturdays. So after a few months, you have enough data to produce the following chart. Okay. So basically, when you have sold the cake for £1, you could sell a quantity of 14 cakes, and then once you increase the price to £5, you was able to only sell it for only sell 6 units, right? So how are we going to actually see the change, how the change of the price has affected the demand? So let's look at the following graph, right? We're going to look at this graph. Here's it. Okay. We are going to, let's assume that we have the case when the price changed from £2 to £3. Here's it, £2, £3, okay? And that actually caused the demand change from 5 units, here's it, to 4 units, right? Okay, so basically the demand decreased, right? So if you remember, like we had, when we were drawing our graphs, sorry for this mess, we said that this is 1x, and this is the second one, and it's going to connect the 4. Here's it, 2, 3, right? So basically the demand fell down from £5 to £4 here. Okay? All right. £3. Yeah. So in this case, we also see that the there have been changes for the lots of variables, right? And that actually shifted the entire demand curve from 5 to 4, right? So in this case, the demand curve shifted to the left. There is a lower level of activity on the market. So that demonstrates that there is a lower level of activity on the market, right? So an increase of the buyer's incomes and an increased preference for the product would actually cause the curve to shift from the left to the right. So it's going to shift back. Okay. Now, in terms of the supply curve, okay, so we said that the supply is the quantity of goods or services that sellers wish to buy. This can be expressed in terms of behavior of a single seller or behavior of all the sellers on the market, right? This is a picture of a supply of a product or products in the market. It is a graph that shows the price on the vertical axis, same as in the demand, and the quantity on the horizontal axis. Okay, so it also we also can see that the quantity increases as the price increases as well. So we can see that when the bakery was selling cakes for £1, they could sell 8. They would produce, let's say, 8 cakes. When it was £5, they would produce 24 cakes, right? So basically the curve slopes upward to the right. Here's it. Okay. So the factors that might influence demand, the supply, would include like selling prices, the prices for inputs, regulation, and technology and know-how. For the selling prices, we could take into consideration the movement of along the supply curve. So we're going to take into consideration how the price increases or decreases and how does it affect the final supply. When it comes to the price of the inputs, they are going to depend on the cost of the raw materials, labor, administration related factors to produce a certain level of output. So in case of the Fleurville bakery, some the factors that might influence the final price of the chocolate cake could be, for example, if the price for the electricity would increase, for example, or maybe the rent would increase, or maybe the if we're talking about the raw materials, we can say about the ingredients, right? We're using some ingredients. We are using flour, we are using milk, maybe we are using eggs, and so on and so forth. So if the price for this ingredients are going to increase, that might actually increase the final price of the cake itself. Then the regulations. Sometimes the government will make the final product more expensive, and in particular we could give an example here of the pharmaceutical business, right? So in pharmaceutical industry, you'll need to test the products for quite a long time, so this might actually influence the final price of the good or service. Okay. And then the technology and know-how, of course, it's very important to find better ways and more efficient ways to produce the goods and services. And basically, the factors that might be improved and influence the supply would be the product design, maybe certain factors might occur in the supply chain, and so on. The next concept we are going to discuss today is the elasticity. So elasticity will involve the idea of how quantities of goods or services demanded and supplied responds to the prices on the market. So in this is a very important concept in economics, and we could speak about elasticity as an effect of the price on quantity demanded and supplied. So for example, demand can be said that it's elastic when a change in price causes a relatively large change of demand. Demand can be said as it's inelastic when a change in price causes a relatively small change in demand. Some of the characteristics here would involve that it can vary at different points on demand or supply curve, can be measured by comparing the change in quantity demanded or supplied with the change of price. It applies both to demand and supply, so we can speak about the price elasticity of demand or price elasticity of supply. Okay, so in the business managers can make judgments about the likely effect of the price changes on demand, and the elasticity is a relative issue, okay, in those judgments. And for example, if the change in the price was relatively large effect, and the quantity demanded, the good or service is elastic. If the change in the price has relatively small effect on the quantity demanded, the good or service is inelastic. Okay, so for example, in this particular case, we can say that the higher elasticity of demand is for the cake, right? So basically, we can see that as the price increases, right, the quantity of the cakes has reduced with 60 pieces, right? And the principle is that as the price rises, people are more likely to cut down on the cake purchase rather than the bread purchase, because people will still need bread, right? Maybe they are going to consume less bread, but they still are going to buy it. In terms of the comparing the elasticity of demand and supply, we can have a look at the following data, right? So we can see that there is a high elasticity of demand and both demand and supply on the market, right? So in case of the sugar beet shreds, right? If the sugar beet shreds are at a price of £2, then we are able to, or let's say there is a demand of 400 units, right? And then for the supply, you can see that it's a very low level, right? Because it's too cheap, right? The company is not really going to be interested to supply a large quantity of sugar beet shreds, because then the packaging and the transportation costs are going to be too high, right? In the case if the price increases, here's it. You have £8 for 100 kilo. We can see that the demand has reduced to zero. What does it mean? It means basically that the farmers are actually not interested to buy it at all. They have substituted with some other types of food for the animals, whereby for the higher prices, the suppliers are actually able to produce or to supply more quantity of this good. So we are going to discuss a little bit more about the supply decision. We can say that the firms, let's say as companies, we might think about the cost of revenues when we're considering the level of output that we wish to produce. So let's say we are planning to increase our output, so we need to have a look at the costs and the revenues, right? To understand how exactly do we have to plan, what would be our strategy, right? So generally it can be assumed that the company will try to produce its goods and services at the lowest cost possible, right? So it is more likely that the firm's total cost will rise as the output rises, okay? And it's also likely that the firm's total revenue are going to rise as the output rises, okay? So the profit is maximized when the total revenue exceeds the total cost. So we have the maximum profit when the revenue increase by exceeds the total cost for the greatest amount. Okay. So in order to analyze the cost revenues, the economists have developed a method of analysis, and this method of analysis allows them to determine at which point the profit of the companies or the firms, because in economics we normally operate with the term firms, the profit is maximized. So instead of looking at the total costs and total revenues, okay, because this is going to create a lot of biased data, and you have to analyze lots of data with lots of difference between different types of costs. The economists look at the marginal cost and the marginal revenue. Okay, so the marginal cost is the change in total cost as a result of producing an additional unit of output, and the marginal revenue is the change of the total revenue as a result of making and selling an additional unit. Okay, so let's see how it works. So if we're going to look into this particular data, right, we have a table with data, okay, and we have a graph. We're going to speak about the graph in the next slide. So we can see that the highest, the profit is the highest at an output of 6. Here's it, right? Okay, so you can see, for example, the total cost is £190. The total the marginal cost is 32. The total revenue is £540. The marginal revenue is 350. So the profit is 350, right? sorry, the marginal revenue is 40 and the profit is 350. So if you look into this particular data here, if you look on the vertical, you can actually see, like for example, if the cost per unit is high, you can see that the revenue is going to be a negative one, right? And the profit is going to be quite low compared to this one, right? And also, if the cost per unit is going to be low, for £1, you can see that there will be no total revenue, there will be no marginal revenue, so the profit is going to be a negative one, right? You cannot sell the goods on a very low price. So the marginal, right, the highest output is going to be at the price of 6, okay? Or it's going to be at the, well, when you sell 6 units, right? The total cost of 90, right? Or total cost of 39. Okay. Now, so the marginal revenue core. So when we're talking about curves, same like in supply and demand, we have the curves, right? So basically, the marginal revenue curve will slope downwards, right? So basically, this is the marginal revenue, and this is the marginal cost. Okay, so basically, the marginal revenue is going to slope downwards, okay, to the right, as the prices are reduced to encourage customers to buy more. Okay, so if you reduce the price, your revenue is going to go down. Here's it. Okay, the marginal cost curve slopes upward to the right as the output rises. So if you're going to increase your cost, then the output is going to increase as well. So the point in which the marginal cost and marginal revenue will meet, the profit is going to be maximized. So it is 6, right? 6.5. Okay. Now, when we are combining the supply and demand curves, we're talking about equilibrium. Okay. So basically, the point where the demand and supply meets, is going to be called equilibrium on the market. Okay. So the curves will cross at the point at the price of £2, right? And at the quantity of 12. Okay, in this point, supply and demand on the market is said to be an equilibrium. Right? There is it's equal between the demand and supply. So at any price of £2, there will be an unsold stock. This will basically going to push on the price downwards. Okay, at any price less than 2, there will be shortage of supply, because we said that at the lower prices, okay, the suppliers are not really ready to produce. Okay, and that is going to push the price to increase. Okay. So in this topic, we discussed basically the most important ideas of economics. We also discussed how the market functions and what are the factors that affect the supply and demand. We also discussed the elasticity and market equilibrium, and we discussed the marginal cost and marginal revenues and how exactly this can calculate, can actually have affect the margin, the profit maximizing output.